Alright, this is more of a fun one today. Obviously, given that it is around the time of bonfire night here in the UK, I thought it'd be quite fitting to make a video touching on that topic. But since so many people already know the history behind the Gunpowder plot, I decided to take it a step further and think about what might have happened if the plot actually succeeded. So how do we get to a point where the plot might have succeeded? Let's start with why it failed. Firstly, one of the plotters actually ratted the whole thing out to the government. That's quite fatal for a plot, right? The government promptly dealt with the plotters involved and had them all executed. On top of this, the actual gunpowder that would have been used to blow up the Houses of Parliament had actually been sitting in the basement for just way too long, meaning that it had actually separated into its chemical components and was no longer actually usable. But both of these occurrences were dependent on one thing, and that was that in the year 1605, Parliament had actually been delayed from its original date of the 3rd of October, and that was when the plot was originally scheduled to happen. But knowing that this actually happened, we have the perfect inroad to a world where the plot could have succeeded. If Parliament weren't delayed, then we can easily assume that the gunpowder would still be functioning. And the issue of the plotter losing his nerve, that's a bit more difficult because there's no way of knowing when the plotter tipped off the government. But for the purposes of this video, let's say that this doesn't happen before the 3rd of October. So what happens? Parliament convenes on the 3rd of October, and King James I of England and 6th of Scotland takes his place. Discussions begin on matters important for the country, and this continues for a few minutes, until the Houses of Parliament go up in a flash. London's in shock. Civilians watch the building go up in flames, with a bang. Shortly after this, news spreads that the king has been killed, which stokes further panic. Rumours circle that this was a Catholic plot, intended to weaken and finally eradicate Protestantism from Great Britain. And these rumours are confirmed when Guy Fawkes's co-conspirators raise up their arms in the Midlands, intending to take control over the country. Regardless of the outcome of the Gunpowder plot, this uprising was destined to fail. Very few Catholics across England knew about this uprising, and even fewer had the stomach to join a civil war. As in real life, the numbers flocking to the rebels' banners would be small, perhaps only slightly bigger this time round due to the success in killing the king. Still, local forces would easily crush this and would end the short-lived insurrection. King Charles I, therefore, takes the throne at a much younger age in this world. Knowing that his father was killed by Catholics, the government's stance on Catholicism would be radically changed. Given Charles's authoritarian tendencies in our timeline, it's not too much of a stretch to guess that he would push for the complete outlaw of Catholicism in Britain, at least when he'd grown up a bit. Those Catholics who weren't killed out of fear by their Protestant neighbours would probably flee to the British colonies or perhaps to mainland Europe. Of the remaining population in England, King Charles would have the support of a much larger population than he did in our timeline. However, I do still think that there might be an English civil war. It would just look a little bit different. There was a large financial problem in Britain before the Civil War in our timeline. And due to trends that reach back just like before the timelines diverge in this scenario, the problem would still exist in our timeline. And this was a large precursor to the Civil War, since the king wanted to raise taxes, but the Parliament was resistant. It's likely that Parliament is more willing to grant tax rises to the popular Anglican King, but eventually I don't doubt that Charles pushes them over the edge. But in this universe, the Civil War probably goes Charles's way. He's got a majority of popular support due to his evangelical and anti-Catholic policies, and he probably has a bit more cash to ensure the loyalty of more soldiers, due to Parliament having a higher ceiling of tolerance. And so, the Civil War is shorter in this time period, and the Royalists will win it. With the Roundheads defeated, Charles would either disband the Parliament completely, or turn it into a performative organ of the state, which would become him. Charles would be the state. Much like Denmark and Sweden in the same time period, Britain would become some form of a Protestant absolutist monarchy. Then Charles would turn his attention to Ireland. The island was Catholic, and thus would be subject to even harsher treatment than it was under Cromwell, because Charles was acting out of blind vengeance. The Irish campaign would probably have taken a bit longer this time round, given that Charles doesn't have an army as good as the new modern army did under Cromwell. But nevertheless, it would have subdued the island, oppressing its people, and probably unifying the independent crowns of Ireland and England and Wales together. That's probably about as far as we can go, where events that we've discussed have a pretty good chance of happening. As with all alternate history, it's guesswork, so it almost certainly wouldn't have worked out this way if the plot actually had succeeded. But it's fun to still speculate. If this new video style does well enough, I could even make a part 2 where I invent some even more absurd future timeline based off of what's happened already. But anyways, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. And yeah.